everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be bringing you my month in review for February. This February I read a grand total of 17 books with an average star rating of 3.75. And since I rate books on a 5-star scale, 3.75 is pretty dang good for 17 books. I rated at least 2 books 5 out of 5 stars, 1 book 2 out of stars, and there's 1 book that I rated 3 stars, which I'm still going to talk about as one of my least favorite of the month. Of the books that I rated 5 out of 5 stars, the first one should come as absolutely no surprise. It is Morningstar by Pierce Brown. I'm not going to talk too much about Morningstar because I've already done my own 25-something minute review of it. It is full of spoilers. I've also done a hour and 15-minute chat with a friend of mine, which again contains spoilers for the entire trilogy. I have also recorded my own version of the Song of Persephone, which is a tune that features in the Red Rising trilogy, most notably in the first one more than any other, set to a melody of my own making, me, a mic, an echo effect, and so if you feel like listening to me caterwaul, please feel free to watch that. Morningstar is the third and final book in Pierce Brown's Red Rising trilogy. It was absolutely fantastic, better than I could have ever hoped, which says a lot because I had super high hopes for this. And if you have not read this trilogy, 1, you need to get on that. I mean, they're all out. You can go read them now. And 2, the best way that I can elevator pitch this series to you is that it is The Count of Monte Cristo meets Game of Thrones on a future Mars, where the rigidly hierarchical color-coded society is like if ancient Rome embraced eugenics. And that doesn't even come close to covering everything that happens in this series. The other book that I rated a 5 out of 5 stars was Dictator by Robert Harris. This was the third and final book in his Cicero trilogy. The Cicero trilogy, as you can guess, is a historical fiction kind of biopic trilogy about the life of Marcus Tullius Cicero. But it's told through the perspective of his secretary, and so we're seeing Cicero from the perspective of someone who's in his employ. The funny thing about this book is that I had actually no idea it had come out until weeks after it had come out, and all of a sudden it popped up on my Audible, and I was like, why didn't I know you were out yet? Immediately listened, loved it. As this is the third and final book, I will not say too much for fear of spoilers, but if you know anything about Cicero, he lived a rather tragic life, and it kind of came to a tragic end, and so I was kind of emotional by the end of this book. Whatever the case, I think Robert Harris constructed an absolutely wonderful trilogy, and I do highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of historical fiction, and historical fiction that tends to take place in the time of ancient Rome. The one book that I rated a 2 out of 5 stars was The Progeny by Tosca Lee. I received this book as a digital ARC through NetGalley from the publisher for the purposes of review. I will not say too much about this book because, as I said, it is a digital ARC. It is not yet out. I don't want to spoil anybody. But ultimately, my issues with this book came down to the writing, and especially the fact that I found it modeled itself after The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown a little too much. It was to the point that by the back half of the novel, I was predicting everything that was happening. Whatever the case, I do think this is going to be probably pretty popular, not only with people who are already fans of Tosca Lee, but also people who just like really cut and dry, easy thrillers. I myself was not too impressed with the writing, didn't particularly like it, and it was a pain to read, actually. It took me a long time to read this book. As I said, there's one book that I did rate a 3 out of 5 stars, but I want to talk about it because of how much it disappointed me. And that book is The Immortals by Joanna Max Brodsky. Basic idea of this novel is that the Greek gods were real. We are now in modern day New York City, and we are following Artemis as she tries to solve a series of murders that are taking place, and in doing so, embrace who she once was. Yeah, I know, I was rolling my eyes too. In fact, I'd had no plans to even read this novel until I saw a review over on the Barnes & Noble science fiction and fantasy blog, and it piqued my interest in it. The reviewer said it was sort of like American Gods, but with the Greek gods, and I like me some American Gods and some Neil Gaiman, and it's Greek mythology, which means I actually really know it, which of course made me really nervous. There were some high points and some low points. However, I do want to stress, if you'd asked me what I was going to rate this book right about before the 50% mark, I would have told you a 4 or 4.5 out of 5. I was having a lot of fun. It wasn't anything particularly mind-blowing, but it was fun, and it was playing to all the points that I, as a classicist, can totally geek out over. Especially when one of the characters, Theo, actually was a classicist, and at one point in the novel, sat there and lectured a New York City cop on the Eleusinian Mysteries. albeit in a very condensed and conflated and sort of made up manner. Understandable, it's the Eleusinian mysteries, nobody really knows anything about them. And I was immediately just like, Theo is bae. It's fine. And then Artemis went to the underworld at about the 50% mark, and the entire novel went downhill from there. It went downhill so much that the only word I have to describe the finale is a shit show. This book tripped its finish line so hard that I had to dock stars from it. It would have gotten a 4.5 out of 5, and I had to dock it down to a 3. And I was so frustrated with this novel, by the end of it, I was making gagging noises at my desk. I'm very likely going to be doing a full video review on this just because I have a lot of feelings on it and I'd like to better express them that way. However, if you're at all interested in some of my thoughts, I did write a review over on Goodreads and tagged my spoilers so you can read it either spoiler-free or with spoilers if you just don't care. As with last month, I did participate in an episode of The Book Table from Backroom Whispering Production, and this past month we did a couple discussions. We did a Valentine's Day special on sex in fantasy literature, but then we also put out as our regular episode a discussion of the evolution of the fantasy genre. This is probably my favorite episode that we've done so far. I had a lot of fun participating in this discussion, so I do highly recommend listening to this episode, especially if you would all want to hear my thoughts on the evolution of fantasy and how I try to define fantasy to myself. You can find it either on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, or over at backroomwhispering.com. In terms of things that I wrote this month, I did write a couple of blog posts over on my own blog, bibliophilemad.wordpress.com, that I'd like to briefly mention here. The first is one that is entitled The Challenge Demands Satisfaction. Yes, that is a Hamilton reference, good for all you people who caught that. The Challenge Demands Satisfaction was my own examination of a particular duel that happens in the opening 120-something pages of Golden Sun by Pierce Brown, and then I basically played a massive game of, ooh, spot the parallel to the Iliad. Basically, I dissected the living hell out of that duel, in noting how it was very, very similar to the duel between Achilles and Hector in the Iliad. If you're at all interested in some of my classicist word vomit, you can find that there. The other blog post that I wrote was originally published on backroomwhispering.com. This particular post was accompanying our Evolution of Fantasy episode, and it was entitled In the Shadow of the Ring. If you'd like to read my rather unpopular opinion about how I don't think Tolkien is really all that original from a literary and plot sense, especially as it pertains to The Lord of the Rings and how much it appropriated from The Ring of the Nibelung by Wagner, you can find that there as well. If you do happen to go and read those, I would really love to hear any of your thoughts on those topics because opinions are fun and I love talking with people about books, if you haven't guessed. But that's it for me today, you guys, and so until next time, cheers.